Hi, I am not going to tell you to get a vaccine or not, but I am going to tell you my story about a virus in the world that can be completely cured, a virus of deception. You might know this virus as the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, or Mormonism. It's a virus that many good people have embraced as true and built many cultural traditions on. My story is based on hidden history that I've uncovered and put together in a new, original context. It is backed up by more facts than the other two more public versions out there you may have heard about Mormonism and its beginnings. If you stick around for the whole video, I'm going to share 18 key reasons why my story explains all this better than the other two versions you may have heard. My story shows how if you have heard of Mormonism, you were probably taught very selective versions of history that include the teaching that Joseph Smith was either a child prophet or an adult con artist. What would you think, though, if I told you that my story shows in a profound way how Joseph Smith was not a child prophet or a con artist, but that he was a victim of a wealthy family who used him as their puppet? That family's last name was Harris. It's understandable that as a victim of the extreme circumstances that eventually resulted in his murder at age 39, as an adult, Joseph would also make mistakes of his own along the way. You may have heard parts about some of them. I'm sharing this here because it's clear to me that I can't tell this full story by myself in the profound ways it needs to be told. I either need a movie studio involved or I need to be elected governor of Utah so I can fix all this and more in different ways. Maybe both. My story starts over 200 years ago during the USA's difficult colonial times. Back then, the outsized USA was struggling to create new states and was still missing 32 of the states that would eventually be a part of it. My story shows how different patriotic groups tried different things to gain a following that could go into the western part of the continent to pave the way for the USA to start forming states again, but none of them were catching on. My story shows how in the New England area, a 10-year-old boy named Joseph Smith had moved 8 times with his traveling family before ending up in a primitive dwelling in Palmyra, New York. At the time, that boy was the 4th of 8 children. Back then, Palmyra was a growing patriotic settlement controlled by a few landowners, including the Harrises, who had recently put the word out that many workers would be needed to hand dig that region's portion of the lucrative 363-mile-long Erie Canal. It would eventually take 9 years to finish the Erie Canal. My story shows how that announcement is what drew the traveling Smith family to Palmyra in 1816, and just a mile from the Harris family's productive lands. My story shows how one member of that family, named Martin Harris, did horrible things to one of Joseph's older brothers named Alvin, to Joseph, the entire Smith family, and to other children and adults for what he believed was an altruistic purpose in all this. My story shows how what Martin did worked because Martin did what none of the other patriotic groups had dared to do. Part of that was to force a child to be his voice, although Joseph was not Martin's first pick as that voice. It was Joseph's older brother, Alvin. My story shows in a profound way that for Mormonism to become what it is from back then through today, many other pieces to the puzzle would have been needed that Martin had plenty of, and that Joseph and the poor traveling Smith family did not. This includes cash, connections, and lots of newcomers. My story shows how the dynamic Martin Harris got his cash in many traditional and non-traditional ways. This includes the Harris family's land, agriculture, livestock, and Martin's ability to make award-winning white linen out of flax, as well as to raise funds for causes he claimed were going on around the globe. Martin got his connections through finance, publishing, and politics. He got lots of newcomers in Palmyra through the completion of the Erie Canal. This happened as one barge after another, full of the Harris family's goods to sell, were sent from Palmyra to the busy port of New York. Then instead of coming back empty, they brought thousands of brave immigrants back to Palmyra, barge by barge, where those immigrants could be introduced and compelled to follow Martin's fabrication. Because the immigrants were newcomers and information did not spread fast back then, they had no idea about the hidden history of Martin's fabrication that would come to be called the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, or Mormonism. That hidden history that they didn't know about includes so much that I've uncovered. My story shows how Martin also ordered that key parts of other organizations' practices be hijacked to use in Mormonism, and that key parts of the Book of Mormon be compiled from 6 other little-known publications by another talented author he compelled to work with him. Harris attempted to eliminate the printing of as many of those other publications as he could. I promise you, my story is the only explanation for the boy Joseph Smith and Mormonism that has all the pieces of the puzzle finally fitting together. Each of the other 2 more public stories leave far too many critical pieces of the puzzle out. This story has been with me since I was a little boy, and the journey of discovering it and getting it this far has taken more than 30 years. For the past 6 years, I've shared parts of this story online in different ways through different forums, on Reddit, other websites, and different web pages I've hosted. Right now, one of those pages is hiddenchurchhistory.com. But I'm not a professional writer, so if you go there, don't expect a literary masterpiece. It's mostly just my notes and some resources for my story and how all this finally comes together. While parts of Mormonism may have had their purpose for the millions of good people who have followed it over these past 200 years, it seems that purpose has came and gone, and more is expected from its followers. This is why it's important to not point fingers, but to open the door to a greater understanding and a brighter light for all of us. If you are a follower of Mormonism, you may want to stop this video now and come back at another time, because I'm going to now share those 18 key elements to my story that are all backed up by hidden history and current events. Number 1, a growing controversy within Mormonism about a private list of second names for certain followers. This controversy is that these names were supposed to be verbally assigned spontaneously in private and kept private by the assignee, when in reality those names follow a monthly list and are assigned based on the day of the month. A clue to all this can be found by going to templenameoracle.com or searching for it, and it'll come up. Number 2, the interwoven storylines, character names, place names, and other similarities the Book of Mormon has to those 6 different publications printed before it. 4 of those publications are The Late War by Gilbert Hunt, The First Book of Napoleon by Michael Linning, A Classical Dictionary updated by Charles Anthon, and Manuscript Story, Connaught Creek by Solomon Spaulding. I may have the author wrong on First Book of Napoleon, but we'll get it right in the notes. Number 3, how private ceremonies within Mormonism are almost identical to ceremonies found in the Patriotic Brotherhood, known as Freemasonry. Number 4, that as an adult, Joseph Smith sometimes spoke in code. 5, that when Joseph was 39, and after a town had been built around Mormonism, he ran for president of the USA instead of leading followers west like he was commanded to do by Martin, and he was assassinated for it just a few weeks later. Number 6, that 3 of Joseph's brothers and others were also murdered during Mormonism's beginnings. 7, that Mormonism's beginnings perfectly fit into a 24-year gap of the USA failing to consistently create new states. This gap finally ended after Mormonism's brave followers, mostly immigrants, were led deep into the western part of the continent even though it was still Mexico territory. They were led by Martin Harris's colluding subordinate leader and now infamous Brigham Young. 8. That a direct descendant of that Harris family is one of Mormonism's 3 highest-ranking officials today. 9. That most of Mormonism's leaders are related. 10. That as an organization, Mormonism holds one of the 5 largest cash accounts in American history. And as a $100 billion corporation masquerading as a religion, there is so much need ignored that is right on its doorstep and around the globe. 11. That until 2020, that cash account was controlled by 13 different corporations with a secret code in their names. And that Martin Harris happened to have 13 children from 2 females. On a side note, one of those females was his first cousin, Lucy, who was 15 when he forced her to marry him when he was 23. And court records from back then show that he was not nice to her. 12. That Joseph Smith's first wife, Emma, remarried a non-Mormon on the same date as Joseph's birthday, 3.5 years after his assassination. And there's a lot to be learned from that. On another note, especially all the possibilities, what message Emma may have been trying to send by remarrying a non-Mormon on Joseph Smith's birthday, 3.5 years after his assassination. And on a side note, Emma and Joseph's surviving family and children did not follow the Brigham Young group west. They stayed in Nauvoo, Illinois, the city that the Harris's cache had built under the banner of Mormonism. 13. That after Joseph's assassination, Mormonism split into at least 5 groups. One group, other than the group that stayed in Nauvoo, and then the other group that Brigham Young took, another group was led north to Wisconsin by another Harris subordinate named James Strange. Like Joseph Smith, Strange was also ordered to claim that he had discovered secret writings. My story shows that Martin Harris's purpose for Strange was to fulfill any need for a backup plan should Brigham Young be murdered by warring native tribes or others, or otherwise fail. Strange was also eventually assassinated. 14. That in Mormon congregations, a certain race was placed above other races for more than 140 years. The most prominent example of that is that African Americans were not allowed to hold certain positions that others were. 15. That Brigham Young chose an eagle holding a pentagram, which is a 5-pointed star, which is a very profound symbol in a lot of ways, before different groups sort of also hijacked the pentagram to mean different things. But within Freemasonry, the pentagram was a profound symbol of a rising light, as a rising star, rising knowledge. But 15 is that Brigham Young, of all the symbols he could have he chose an eagle, which is also the symbol of the USA, holding a pentagram to be the centerpiece of a large statue spanning a prominent street in Utah that still stands today. Rather than him choosing any of the symbolism within Mormonism, he chose that eagle and the pentagram. 16, that a forensic image and other images of Joseph Smith have been ignored in favor of Mormonism, using the popular cartoon or painted versions of Joseph Smith instead, which are a lot more flattering, given the time those pictures that picture was originally taken. 17, that of all the people associated with Mormonism's beginnings, Martin Harris's grave marker is by far the most prominent, even though he has been all but written out and forgotten within Mormonism's published history that is shared with newcomers of today. And 18 is the unprecedented entanglement of church and state in Utah, which, aside from politics, includes a Mormon-controlled law school that credentials followers of Mormonism to be attorneys and endorses certain ones of them to be politicians in Utah. And then they all pay into the Mormon system, and this has gone on unchecked for decades. So remember that neither of the other two ideas for Joseph Smith and Mormonism can explain all this and so much more. My story of cash, connections, and newcomers, or based on cash, connections, and newcomers, is the only story that does. There is so much more to share, and I can't wait for the right talented people to come along to share this with. Thank you.